Welcome back to the Data Stack Show. Today we're going to talk with Rob Rastovich, and he is a fascinating guy. He built an IoT company that he sold to Amazon, and actually we'll find out, whether or not some of the stuff that he built is still running in Amazon. But he's also a cattle rancher, so just a really interesting, diverse guy. Kostas, I think my burning question is, I think about IoT and I can't help but think about, going to, like a Best Buy or something and looking at a smart refrigerator or a smart washing machine. And I just wonder how widespread is the implementation of that? I know there's a lot of sort of IoT stuff, maybe in like warehouses, Amazon warehouses where, they're sort of doing inventory and there's lots of robots, but I wonder how widespread it is. So that's what I'm going to ask. How about you?
Yeah, I don't know. The first thing that comes to my mind when I'm thinking about IoT is like when Roombas are going to revolt and, they will just escape from every house.
Then that'll just make the world a cleaner place.
Yeah, I think probably that would be a good idea here in San Francisco, to be honest. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think it's probably the first time that we are going to have a discussion about IoT.
Yeah, I think so.
So yeah, I'd love to get to learn the space more, like see how the technology looks like, what are the use cases, what are the technologies out there, how mature are, because there's also a lot of fluff around that stuff, because there's also like a lot of like B2C products. So yeah, I think we are going to have a very interesting conversation, and hopefully we're also going to learn something about how you can combine IoT with cattle. So let's see what he has to say about that stuff.
Well, let's do it.
Yeah.
Rob, welcome to the Data Stack Show. We have so many things to dive into, but thank you for giving us a little bit of time.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate you having me.
You have a fascinating background, and I'm not going to spoil it for the listeners, but give us the brief background on, how you got into data, and then what led you to working with ThingLogix today.
I started out actually in marketing. My job was I had an advertising agency in Southern California. That was my background. And when the internet first came around and we started working, we found out that, okay, well, this is another mechanism for us to sell ads, back in the early 90s. And so I started playing around with the internet and then started putting up e-commerce pages. And once I started that, I always say that was the point where I got hooked on technology. That was the crack cocaine, when you first see you put up a page and you click on something and, oh my gosh, something else happens. And you put something to a basket and you make a transaction and the sale number goes up. Back in those days, we had the counters on the pages, when the biggest thing was how many pages people were going to your page. So that's when I really got the bug. Started doing that for a number of years, and then did a conference in San Francisco and saw Mark Benioff and Parker Harris right click and deploy to a cloud. And I was hooked on the whole Salesforce ecosystem, being able to do, not having to worry about servers and JDKs and SDKs and application servers and all those things. And so I drank the Kool-Aid, drank the cloud Kool-Aid back then, and started doing Salesforce consulting. Did that for, probably 8 or 10 years. And then some of the guys that I was working with, we got the bug. We said, all right, well, this whole machine to machine thing, we think that's going to be the next big thing. And so we spun off and we started a company in Denver called Telemetry. And our objective was, the belief was that, okay, the next big .com boom, if you will, is going to be IoT. We didn't call it IoT back then. We called it machine to machine. But basically, the idea of a device talking to another device, or talking to you and you talking to your device. The use case back then was being able to turn your thermostat down from your phone and those kinds of things. So our goal was to build a message broker that could handle the amount of data that we believe was going to be coming through IoT. And that product that we ended up trying to build had to be something that didn't exist today. So didn't exist back then. The idea was, when we were doing servers and we were doing applications back then, it was all the size of the server, how many hits you could take, how big the database was. Well, this had to be a technology that could handle, 1 million concurrent connections, constantly, and keep growing and growing in scale. So that was our objective. Well, and our goal was because we had come from the Salesforce ecosystem, was to sell it back to Salesforce. And I remember we were testing it out. We had a customer that said, okay, prove it. You think you can really do 1 million concurrent connections for a week solid? And we said, yeah, we can do it. Well, when you're talking about 1 million concurrent connections, that's 1 million connections every millisecond, right? Not like, 1 million hits a day. It's 1 million connections every millisecond for a week. And that takes a big infrastructure to even to do that and to test that.
Sure.
We spun up a bunch of these EC2 instances on Amazon, and we literally got a call from Amazon going, "What are you doing? Please stop that." And we explained what we're doing, and the test was successful, and it was it was very quick after that. It was 3 or 4 months after that, and we sold the company to Amazon, and what is today the microservice AWS IoT was the technology we were building back then.
Wow.
And so, and I live on a cattle ranch. I have 200 acres and 400 head of cows. We can talk about that later too, but at the time,
we definitely will. We definitely will. We'll make time.
At the time, I wasn't gonna. You had to move to Seattle because during that acquisition, you had to move to Seattle.
Sure.
And there was no place to put 400 cows in Seattle. And so myself and one of the other partners and one of the other founders of Telemetry, we decided to spin up ThingLogix because Amazon was more interested in the tech than the customers that we had. So we really started developing professional services around IoT and trying to create a pattern by which to deliver an IoT solution. Because of our Salesforce kind of DNA that we had, Salesforce really did for CRM what we've done for IoT. And I imagine Benioff and Parker Harris sitting around one day going, "I got an idea." Everybody out there is creating a database and they're calling their table account and they're calling it contact and they're making a join and they're doing all the same. Why don't we just give them all of that, and they can log in and they're all going to need the same things. And then we'll give them the building blocks to expand on that. Well, we took the page right out of that and said, that's the same thing with IoT. You're going to need all these things. You're going to need context. You're going to need security. You're going to need certificates. You're going to need an API. You're going to need all this stuff to interact with your IoT devices. So why don't we just build that and give that to them? That's what ThingLogix now became. We ended up building, we have a product called Foundry, which we have since open sourced, and it's free to everybody to install in their AWS instance and start configuring their way to an IoT solution.
Wow. So question for you. It really struck me that you started out by assuming mass scale in terms of required volume for IoT. And that's so interesting to me because a lot of times, you'll sort of, when you're thinking about a new startup or a new technology, you think, okay, let's try to prove this out on a small scale. But it seems like you started with the assumption of mass scale. I'd love to just know more about the thinking behind that. And then also, did you estimate too low or too high?
Well, so the first problem you have to solve when you're talking about the data, the IoT world is customer. And I say there's a life cycle to an IoT project, right? And the life cycle goes like this. A customer shows up and they say, "Look, I have this thing. Can you connect it to the internet? So I want a connected thing." And so we show, you put some little firmware on there, you make a little MQTT client, and now you're publishing data, and you show a little web page and it says, "Look, here's your data." And they go, "That is so cool. There's my data. I can see it going up there." Then the next thing they ask for is they say, "Okay, can you put it on a graph?" Sure. So you you make a little graph and you watch it, the graph go dynamically up and go down. And they go, that's amazing. That's awesome. We want to, well, can you make it send me a text message? Like when temperature gets greater than 100, I want to get an alert. Sure. I can make it send you a text message. Then they say, can you connect 100,000 of these? Right. Because I don't have a business with one. And then they have what I call the oh shit moment. Hope I can say that.
You can say
where they go, oh my God, how are we going to manage all these? How are and then turn off the text message because I'm tired of getting it. Don't send me an alert anymore and get rid of the graph. And now we need to manage this at scale. So we knew that going in, that if you're going to have a business on this, and if you're going to have truly a connected product, whether it was a refrigerator or a dryer or or a temperature sensor, the business model had to be infinitely scalable. And so we set out to prove that, yes, you can connect an infinite amount of devices and have that infrastructure, automatically, expand and contract for you. So we did start out with that idea. Did we succeed? Yes, we did. Now, since that time, Amazon has taken it obviously to a whole new level. So, the stack that we sold actually still runs the core of it, but they've added their whole ecosystem around it, and as ThingLogix, because we took and we started adding their whole ecosystem around the solution as well. So
yeah. And so would you say, I'm also interested in Kostas, I'll hand the mic to you after this, because I know you have a ton of questions as well. But how when you think about IoT, when I think about IoT, it's a little bit novel, right? You think about, okay, smart home, you hear a lot of things about the smart home. Maybe people have, a Nest or, a smart washer dryer or whatever, but how pervasive is it from your perspective? Is it one of those things where it's way more pervasive than we think it is, and sort of all these devices are sending data, or are we still on early innings as far as mass adoption? And maybe that varies between, commercial and consumer.
Well, it's not as pervasive as I want it to be. I'll tell you that. Because I say one of the things about doing a startup, and I say we have created a solution to a problem that most people don't even know they have yet. So you can get out to the bleeding edge, but you kind of got to wait for the corporate America to get caught up. And I think we are still at the very beginning stages. And quite frankly, the pandemic has actually increased, people's awareness of IoT. When the pandemic hit, we actually came out with, and we built we called it WorkWatch, an application on top of our platform, where it took health surveys, it had a kiosk, it automatically took your temperature and, did all that real-time interaction kind of stuff. And we were able to spin that up and get going in like 3 or 4 weeks. But those types of applications now became like people's awareness. A big one for us during the pandemic became people counting. We had a very simple camera. You put at the beginning, at the entrance of a store, and you have a little sign on the side, and it counts the number of people going in, it counts the number of people going out, so that you have occupancy and capacity compliance. There was during the heart of it, we had a customer come to us that they were trying to get some people back to work, and their biggest problem was you had to make an appointment for the restroom, right? Because you couldn't have more than one person in the restroom at a time. So they had to come up with a system whereby, kind of like the light that you have on in an airplane, to tell you when someone's in, and then to have when you can go and when to not. And so all those types of little applications, I think, is greatly increase the awareness of people's need for that these things are going to come around. Yeah. So it is becoming more and more pervasive, but yeah, it truly is. I still think we're at the beginning of it. And one of the things that I'm very passionate about is how business could take advantage of these. It's a subscription-based economy that we're going to, where you're now, the example I always give is we had a pool supply company come to us and they said, well, we want you to update our website so that people can do online scheduling and they can order their products online and they can, we can do a service call line. It's the wrong business model. What you need is a connected pump. You put the connected pump in the pool, create a subscription model. The pump now tells you when the chemicals are low. So you don't have your customer, he doesn't have to go order, the chemicals just show up. You don't have to have that emergency call on Friday night that says, I got a pool party coming on Saturday. Can you come out and fix it? Because you can do predictive maintenance on the pools like that. So it's a different way of thinking about your business. And that shift in the business, I think, is what takes time, but it's coming.
Yeah. Would you also say, sorry, Kostas, I lied. One more question. Would you say, we still have plenty of time. I'm so bad about this. Would you say also that, let's take the pool pump example. And I was thinking about, refrigerator, you mentioned a couple of other devices. Is there also a time lag with the replacement cycle of those, right? I mean, you don't buy a new refrigerator every year. And so even though there's a lot of availability of the technology on the market to actually replace physical devices, especially ones where I just think about, it's like, well, I couldn't even tell you how old my washing machine is. Would it be nice to have a, smart washing machine so I can, sort of manage that, on my phone? That'd be great, but I also am not going to replace it just to get that right now because it still works okay.
Yeah. And, you have that cycle along, like, you have the early adapters who are going to go buy anything that's tech. If you had told me, 30 years ago, 40 years ago that, hey, one day you're going to buy a brand new phone every 2 years and it's going to cost you over $1,000 every time you want to buy a new, I'd go, you crazy? It's $3.99. It's on the side of the, it's on the wall here. Why would I want to buy a new phone? It works fine, So that technology cycle, I think, is getting shorter and shorter, and if you had told me 20 years ago that, hey, I would turn off my cable and I'd only, I'd buy stuff off the internet, would not have believed that, but yeah, there is that lag, but I think it's getting, shorter and shorter because the market that's growing up now is very used to, technology and that cycle. Us old guys, we weren't used to that cycle. So it wouldn't be, out of the question. And they've got, disposable income too. It wouldn't be out of the question for them to be walking through Home Depot or Lowe's. And I saw this the other day, and I have to have one too, by the way, a refrigerator that has a coffee maker built into it. That is the coolest thing ever. And then I go home and I think, I got to get a new refrigerator because I got to have a Keurig inside of my refrigerator.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is that, but it is getting shorter, I think.
Yeah. This is great. Rob, I have a question about something that you mentioned earlier, and mainly because we take many things for granted. Like today, Salesforce, everyone knows about Salesforce, everyone knows about the cloud. But what was the feeling that first time that you saw the founders of Salesforce demoing in front of you a cloud solution? And not only yours, but also the people around you. Can you share a little bit more about this? Because I think this is going to be super interesting.
The technology is one of the things that excites me. Technologies and cows, right? Those are my two hot points, right? And I had spent most of my career at Harbor Freight, provisioning servers, and it was always a fight. And then we had a DBA. I mean, every time we needed a table, we had to do that. And how you did indexing, and there was just so much that went into that, infrastructure. And that I mean, when I first put up my very first website, I had to provision the T1 line. I had to figure out what a DNS was. I had to figure out how to do routing tables. You had to, all of that, which kind of now is abstracted to anybody. And you just, I don't know, you just upload your website and there it is, take it for granted. So when I saw that, I thought, oh my God, this is where things are going, because it made so much sense. And I had created those web type of applications in the enterprise. We were doing those, but not on the scale that, that Salesforce was doing. And so I remember going, I want to be a part of this. So there was a company, Aperio. It was one of the very first little boutique consulting agencies that started up to do exclusively Salesforce consulting. So I was like employee, and I finally said, okay, I'm going. I actually went back and they said, I told a tool company that didn't want to put up a website because they never thought anybody was going to buy tools or put their credit card online. I said, hey, let's move all of our data to the cloud. And they looked at me like, you have completely off your nut, So I wanted to be a part of it. I ended up getting recruited by these guys at Aperio and went into that thing. And at that time, we had to, I remember the sales cycle when you're going through and you're trying to sell a Salesforce implementation. The sales cycle wasn't about, is Salesforce a good platform or is it a good idea? It was, well, what is the cloud? Where is it? Where is my data going to be? And why should I do that? And security and all those same questions that we answered, 20 years earlier in the .com boom, we're now asking and answering for this. But it was a very exciting time because in a small startup like that, everybody else had drank the Kool-Aid too. It's like, this is game changing, and the whole notion of IT becoming a utility, like your electricity or like your water or like the gas instead of the server closet. That to me was also game changing. There's a book, I forget the name, about the Great Transformation, where they talk, about how when electricity became utilitized, that really changed the way business could work, where you could just plug in and you could use only the electricity that you needed to use. You didn't have to have a generator outside your factory to create it. That changed the way business. So when IT becomes a service and IT becomes more utility, where you just pay for what you use, I thought that was a game changer. And, Aperio ended up doing very well. They, we left and started telemetry before they were sold, but Aperio grew to, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 people, was acquired by Wipro. It's still going strong today, but it's part of a big SI now.
Nice. And how did you go from CRMs to IoT?
Yeah.
How did this happen?
Yeah. Well, one day, so I had been doing it for it's almost 10 years, I think. And, there's only so many times you can say, well, this is an account and accounts have contacts. And then here's a lead. And when a lead comes in, it converts to an account and a contact and it creates an opportunity. And then the opportunity, and then they go, and then every customer's like, well, but I'm really different. My world is different. What I need is an opportunity that has a different value in the stage field. Okay. So we did that. And I ran a really big implementation for NetApp. I spent 3 years in implementing their CRM. And at the point I was like, I want to do something new. And quite honestly, I don't think I've ever told this story. You guys pull out all these little stories from me that I didn't have told you. So I'm actually out in the field one day. It's summer day. Out in the field, out with the cows, and and I'm irrigating. I'm changing the irrigation. And I remember thinking to myself, like, well, so the .com came around, I won and lost fortunes. And then the cloud kind of came around. We won and lost fortunes, because, I love the technology. I'm a much better technician than I am a businessman. That's for sure. And I'm standing out in the field and I says, okay, you're so damn smart, Rob. You think that you knew that the internet was going to be, e-commerce was going to be, and you think you knew the cloud. So what's the next big thing? And I remember thinking, it's got to be IoT. It's that ability to connect things and have data move back and forth and have that messaging and things take care. I go, that's going to be it. Well, I think I was right, but I was way too early. mean, we were way too early on there, but that's really what it was. At some point, you're all, and people always ask me, well, how can you be a farmer and a technician at the same time? And I say, everybody should do it, because it's those moments, right? And we've all experienced those times, like, I can't solve this problem. How do I do this? You get away from it, you go to sleep, you get on a plane, and all of a sudden the answer comes to you. Well, every day I do that same process. I'm working, on the computer. I'm either solving a problem or trying to write a piece of code. I get stuck. I go out and I'm, change the irrigation, or, move the cows here and there. And you get out and you kind of do something with your hands, and it kind of frees your mind up like that. Those things come to you. And then I think when the quite opposite is true, if I had to do that all day long, I'd go crazy. I love that grounding actually gives me the freedom, I think, to explore and be more creative on the tech side.
That's great. So IoT, how is IoT different in terms of like technology and infrastructure? Like, why is it different than anything else that we have built like in technology? What are the differences there?
So, and that's a great question. And one of my other passions is that I try desperately to explain to people. I think for the last 15, 20 years, we have lived in what I call a request response world, right? Maybe 30 years, a request response world, meaning, and think of a simple web page. Like, you click on a button on a website, you click on a link, it sends a request to a server, that server sends you a response, and now you see a new page. And you rinse and repeat that, and you go through all these different processes. Our businesses have actually mirrored that technology. And there's a great book called Man is the Measure that always talks about how we, as humans, actually mirror our technology, that there's this underlying influence that technology, provides, and we model our world. And it goes back to the clock and how the mechanistic, period where when the clock started becoming, very precise mechanisms. But in business, we do the same thing. We request from our customers. We send them emails. We send them advertisements. We try and we request that they ask us for information, and whole industries are designed around this request, sending out information and asking for the request. And then we get a response from our customer, and then that customer goes into our systems, and it goes through a journey. These marketing automation systems call them journey, and you take them through the journey, and ultimately, they buy your product, and then you give them that kind of back and forth. Where I think IoT is changing that fundamentally, is changing this idea that now, instead of that request response, it is, the new UIs, the Alexas, the Google Homes, SMS messaging, the new UIs of tomorrow are going to require an immediate action on an event. It's going to be, and it is today, Alexa, send me some more dog food. Well, it's not a request response kind of thing. It is an event. I spoke, and something needs to happen, and a whole bunch of things need to happen down the road. And the data from my speech has to be translated into an order and my address, and all of those events, go down there. And we talk about the pool, a pool company that comes to us and they say, okay, well, we want to build a new website. This new website, we want it to have a calendar on it, so you can request a maintenance, and we want people to be able to order their products, and we want to, schedule our service and our cleaning, those kinds of things. It's a very, traditional business model, and we'll drive people to the website and they'll buy our product. Well, to switch that model around and said, okay, let's not do that. Let's take a connected pool pump that sends us the pH, the alkaline, the chlorine, sends us data about how the pump is working, and do that as a subscription model. Now I have a customer that is very sticky. Like, I'm not going to lose them. I got their chemicals are arriving automatically. Their pump is being on a maintenance schedule. that is predictive. In other words, it's not like, okay, if we have a pool party on Saturday and it goes down on Friday, I don't have to go out and do emergency because I can see the predictive maintenance schedule that needs to go on there. So it changes that model in there about how we do businesses and how businesses interact. We did one called Cleaning as a Service. Hoover vacuum cleaners installed our technology, and they connected the vacuum cleaner. Now, we all have heard about the Roomba, the iRobots, cleaning thing, but Hoover went to one step further and said, what if we did cleaning as a service? What if we said, okay, we know that 99% of the reason that people return our vacuum cleaners is because their filter is dirty and they don't know how to clean it.
Yep.
Right. What if we just sent them a new filter when it got dirty? And what if, those parts and pieces came to you instead of, would you use that vacuum cleaner more? Yeah. And you would probably do a tech refresh more often than you would, if you just, have it, and you would be more loyal to the brand. Because if you think your vacuum cleaner is not working because, it's just, it doesn't work, when really it's just you didn't change a filter, you're going to throw it away. Instead of getting a Hoover, you're going to go get a Decker or whatever they call them. But if you know that, I get my parts and my pieces and it gets fixed, and when the new one comes out, I get a new one. I think it changes how you do business and how the stickiness is of a customer to a company.
Yeah. That's super interesting. And okay, from what I understand, like the way that you describe it, when we are talking about IoT, we are talking about like this kind of connectivity of the physical world with, let's say, the digital world. Yeah. And there's a lot of telemetry happening, right? Like you have all these sensors, like all these devices, the remote devices that they live like on whatever like equipment we have out there, like the pump, for example. So there's a lot of data there, right? What are like in terms of scalability and in terms of like the technical requirements? What do we need in order to realize like this vision that you are describing right now?
That's a great question too. And the first thing you have to do is kill the SQL server, right? Because tables and rows don't work anymore, right? Yeah. You can't do, and we have been and I've seen so many IoT implementations who they've tried to do it. They go, okay, we're gonna spin up. Well, okay, we can't use SQL Server. We can't use MySQL. We're gonna have to spin up, a Redshift or something that's really grows. But IoT data is changing. Version 1 of the firmware probably sends you temperature and maybe battery life, and version 2 has latitude and longitude, and version 3 has humidity and temperature and battery life and latitude and longitude. And so you can't be living in a structured data world trying to put an unstructured data world into a structured data world. So that was the first thing, and unstructured data is very uncomfortable for IT people. Like, it's like, okay, they understand indexes, they understand tables and rows, and I even remember as a traditional Java programmer and traditional database developer, I remember going, NoSQL, that makes no sense. How can you have unstructured data? That didn't make any sense. I go, oh, you mean it's a Word document? No, it's not a Word document. Oh, you mean it's a PDF? No, it's actual data, but you don't know what the columns and rows are, and that's number one. So now that you have that, now you need a place to say, okay, how do I put logic? Where do I put my code? I've got code that I want to write. I want to create a solution. And where do I drop that code so that when the temperature value comes up and the temperature is 100 and the temperature sensor is in Arizona, the logic does something different than if the temperature value is 100 and the temperature sensor is in Alaska, right? Where do you put that logic, and how do I, put context around that? Like, so where are my devices? Who owns it? Who do I bill? And is there a rogue device? And how do I protect it? And all those kinds of things. So we put in, everything's event driven. Everything turns off of event. So a message comes and something happens, and there is a series of events. Now you have to have an infrastructure that is pretty robust to handle this. This is not something that's going to go in the server closet. So it has to be cloud computing. It has to be AWS. It has to be Azure. It has to be Google. It can't be anything other than that. And that to me is also, and I think one of the exciting things where technology has come. And I remember, without the advent of the internet, and this sounds almost naive, right? In the advent of e-commerce, there would be no Amazon, right? Without these cloud computing, without the evolution of cloud computing going to, and I mean, not just Salesforce cloud computing where we had CRM in there, but I'm talking enterprise data, 100% in the cloud with that kind of compute power. Without that kind of compute power, we couldn't have these types of business models. We couldn't have these types of devices and data coming up.
Mm-hmm. And how, what I understand is that the way that I visualize it is we have like all these sensors. The sensors are sending data on the clouds. On the clouds, we run some logic, right? And we do something. Like, for example, we make a request on our CRM that this customer, his vacuum cleaner needs a new filter, and someone is going like to fulfill like this order and all that stuff. Do you see this being also like bi-directional, like in the terms of like the clouds and the device on the other side start interacting and not just being passive? This kind of like the pump, for example, like opening and closing the pump, or this kind of things. Do you see this happening?
Absolutely, yeah. And we always talk about the life cycle of an IoT project, right? Where they, somebody says, all right, can you connect this up to the cloud? I've got a water sensor. And so yeah, we connect it up. You see the data coming in. Oh, isn't that cool? Isn't that interesting? Can you put it on a graph? Yeah, you can put it on a graph. Can you, can you make it send a text message? Yeah, you can make it send a text message to you. But really, that's not a smart device. That's just a dumb device sending data up to the cloud, right? What a smart device does is say, oh, if there is water, tell the pump to turn off. Not just send you a text message so that you can go turn the pump off. Go and turn the pump, actually go turn the pump off. And when the pump turns off, it should notify, maybe the utility company that it's got a leak or something. There's open up a service ticket in your utility company. So yes, these devices can't be just, dumb data collectors where they're sending data up. They got to be both ways. And really the interesting part of it is I think businesses have to be that way too. So one of our clients is the United Way. And the United Way, you think, okay, well, what devices does the United Way use? None. They don't use any device. But we use the same paradigm we did agencies as a device, if you will. So Cisco actually sponsored an initiative they wanted to do 1,000 people out of poverty was the name of their program. And they contacted us and said, hey, what we want to do is be able to coordinate care across multiple agencies in the Silicon Valley in San Francisco. And they want to be able to coordinate their care, but they're all disconnected systems. And right now, and we have a person that isn't really going to fill out a form or, is not going to, the whole data input is a problem. Someone's going to do it on their behalf. So we enabled each of their devices to basically create a database as a device. So we put a small piece of code, a very inobtrusive piece of code on these databases that would chirp and say, okay, well, this record just got updated, so it sends a message. The message comes into Foundry, ThingLogix Foundry, and we can coordinate that against its other care, get referrals to other networks. And so their entire networking system became an event-driven thing. So once a person says, all right, they're leaving the homeless shelter to go to the job training shelter, that immediately. And you can track them, you can do that. And, and I think in California, it works out really nice because the state also provided cell phones. And so as state provided cell phones, you could track and coordinate their care and whatnot. So it is a situation where, and it's got to go both ways. It's got to, this is not, it's not messaging of just saying, listening to it, but it's got to be interactive. That's why I think it's the internet of everything and not necessarily just the internet of things.
Yeah. There's a lot of discussion also about like the impact that 5G is going to have on that, like stuff like edge computing. So the compute actually is going to move away a little bit from the cloud and go closer to these devices, because I mean, if we end up like connecting everything, that's a lot of bandwidth, right? Like going back and forth. So what do you see in terms of like the maturity of the technology right now? Where do we stand? I mean, the vision is amazing, it's great. Like we have all these connected devices, we can become as lazy as we want, everything will happen automatically, so we are cool. But where are we today?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned 5G, and a lot of people think that okay, 5G is going to take us to the next level of that. But ironically enough, one of the biggest use cases for IoT is agriculture, right? And I know that because I live on a ranch, and plus most of our stuff we have a lot of agricultural clients. And in agriculture and in IoT, it's not bandwidth. It's not, vertical bandwidth, not how much you can, because the messages are very small, but it's distance. It's like, can I get a temperature sensor out, 200 acres, and there's not Wi-Fi around my 200 acres, but can I get a temperature sensor out in the backfield to send me moisture data back? And so technologies like LoRa, where it's very small payloads, but very long distances, that to me, I see as defining technologies in terms of the IoT world, because it's not the amount of bandwidth we need the reach of it, and we need to be able to go everywhere. But where are we in terms of, are we, is this all kind of pie in the sky, or is this actually happening? And there's a couple things so it actually happens, but there's two things that slow it down. Number one, we talked about, I think it's enterprises, learning to do this new business model. Corporate America doesn't change quickly. Number two is fear, right? It is, and we see this almost daily. And when we were developing this technology, we had some people who were very interested in our technology that made us a little nervous to, that they wanted to invest in this. And we're very unnervous, because reality is we are building Big Brother, right? There is no question about that, and all things connected. And that is a scary thing. And when everything's connected all the time, and one of the other discussions that I also love to have is ethics and morals, that I think we as technicians have a responsibility to, when we have this technology, to make sure that, it is properly used. So it will always be used for ill and good. I don't doubt that, but I do think that that is coming. So that fear, and it's the same fear we saw when people putting their credit card on the internet. Like they would never do it. Why would we put our credit card in the internet? Well, eventually you will. Eventually you get comfortable with it. Now, hopefully, and we see this all the time now, and it's getting scarier. You do a search on Google, and all the ads pop up on Facebook for what you did a search on Google for, and all of this stuff. It's too scary. We can do really, connected kind of things, but because you can do a thing doesn't mean you should do a thing. And I think we're kind of at that spot where, and I saw I think Facebook announced today they were going to change their ad algorithm, or there was something about that they said, okay, enough, we'll stop doing this crazy kind of stuff. But it also is, there is a value to that too. And I go back to like my beef customers, right? Like if I just texted everybody in Bend, Oregon and said, hey, buy ground beef from Rob Rastovich. Well, most of them are, I'm going to get all kinds of expletives back about why you're texting me, how did you get this number and whatnot. But the ones that I do engage with, that ones that choose to have that kind of relationship, it creates a new kind of relationship between me and my customer that is much stickier, much more personal. And even you look at like telemedicine and the things that we can start doing telemedicine and all those things. There's a lot of value in this, but I think we're just starting.
Yeah.
So Rob, I have
one
to
last
ask.
question, Eric, and then the stage.
Oh yeah, yes.
Okay.
He's gonna pull the Eric on you. Yeah.
Of all people, I need to grant you this request after being a repeat offender so many times.
So yeah, last question is, what about 3 words? One is security, the other is safety, and the third is privacy. You touched privacy a little bit, but I think what is interesting with connecting the physical world is that we can have scenarios that are from funny to tragic, right? Like I can imagine someone hacking my Ruba and my Ruba, for example, attacking me, right? So I wouldn't like this to happen. So what have we done towards that? Like, where do we stand about that? And what is needed so we can feel as safe as possible around IoT?
Yeah. So, I mean, and that is always our number one concern and question we get it from our customers. Like how can we make sure that this doesn't fall into the right hands? And I think we are doing a lot of those things. So, the monitoring systems we're doing, the certificate systems, the being able to make sure that what is sending the data truly is it. We have, and we've all seen, certificates on websites that when you put your credit card in, you want to make sure that it's a secured site and whatnot. Well, each one of these devices actually has, a certificate on it, and it has connected. Because early on, we had all of that on there as well. We had many stories, and you can hear these stories over and over again about how IoT devices got hacked. And, one of my favorite stories was there was a rental car company that said, hey, we'll make a mobile app that will unlock the car. And they think, well, that's kind of cool. You don't have to get the key, you unlock the car, you get in, you can drive off. Well, they did that. And this elderly couple drove out into the desert of Nevada someplace and got out to look around, and there was no cell phone signal, and they couldn't unlock the car. They couldn't get back in the car because there was no connectivity on there. And then there's stories about people turning lights on and off about, through other devices. So it is a main concern. And so the audits that we go through, one of the things that we did, one of our customers is Emirates MDB. We actually have an office in Dubai, and we do a lot of IoT in the Middle East there. They're very much, willing to, they seem to be more open to these IoT solutions than we are in the States, but security is a huge concern. So going through the security audits and doing all those best practices, and even today, I think most people think, and I think there's a common misconception that the biggest danger is some hacker is going to figure out your password and get into, your system. That is a danger, but we have such great protections against that. The real problem in all of this is the social engineering part of it. And there's a great YouTube video, and I don't know if you've seen it, but the guy is a news reporter, and he has a hacker is telling him, it's a lady, and she says, you give me your phone number, I'll close your bank account and have your social security number and turn your phone off. And he goes, there's no way you can do that. She goes, yeah, I can do that. And I can do it. All I need is your phone number and who your carrier is. He told her phone number and who the carrier was. She finds an audio recording on the web of a crying baby. She gets on the phone with this dear, sweet, wonderful, well-intentioned customer service rep for the carrier. And the crying baby's going off, and she goes, and she explains to this person how her husband's going to get mad, and she's got a baby, and she's got to get this, and she doesn't have his social security number. And she goes through this whole thing, and at the end of the day, she has all those. He's turned off his cell phone, has his bank account closed, and knows his social security number. Okay, not through a process of hacking into, bits and, bits and bytes, but through a process of social engineering. And that's really where the danger lies. And I think the misconception is that it's all, oh, we got, hacker. Yes, that is a threat, but it is nowhere near the threat of, phishing links. But here, click on this link, and all of a sudden you're giving your password away to somebody.
Fascinating. Tons to think about. We're close to time, but the question that I had to ask was, you started to talk about some use of IoT in the context of your ranch. Can you just tell us how you use IoT technology, if and how you use IoT technology as a cattle rancher?
Yeah, you wouldn't think it would be top of the list. Well, and I'm probably the exception in the cattle ranching industry in terms of IoT, right? So what I've started to do is, so we have what my model is, where I take in, cows, and we feed them beer mash. So we pick up the spent grains from the local breweries in Bend. Deschutes Brewery is probably our most well-known one, and we feed that to the cows. So and then we sell the meat back to the pub. So when you come to town and you have a burger and a beer, you're eating a burger raised on the beer you're drinking. And so everybody
do that.
Everybody needs to show up at Bend, but the process of handling cattle is a when you handle cattle, you want to keep a cow as least stressed as you possibly can. I mean, if you've ever been in a 24 by 24 pen with a 1,600 pound animal that is very stressed, you don't want to do that, right? That is a bad place to be. So each cow has an RFID tag in their ears, so we know, which one they are. So what we're starting to do, and what we're trying to develop, it's not completed yet, but we're working on it, is a series of, and we built the new corrals, and we have RFID readers, so that as a cow passes through and on this way to feed or to get a drink of water or something like that, we'll read and see what the number was. We could then punch in we have an inventory of cows, and we can see, okay, which one has been here the longest, which one weighs the most, which one is ready to go to market. Because today, the one that goes to market is the slowest one, the one that you can catch and put in there. That may not be the real one that should be going to market, right? So as the cow passes through these readers, we can open and close a series of gates that just very casually, moves the cow into an isolation pen, and then they close back in, and the rest of the cows go to where they normally go. So by having that type of system in there, you're able to keep very less stress on the cow, because they just move in and get their feed. The safety of the handler is, he doesn't have to get in there with the 1,600 pound animal. And so that's one of the use cases where you can now use IoT to move and change, you can change gates and move them and move cattle around. The other one we used, we grew industrial hemp a couple of years ago after it became legal in Oregon. And as a result, we could start using fertigation. We call them fertigation systems. So in other words, you put a sensor out, and because in hemp or row crops, what they call it, and a row crop is, like anything that you plant in a row. That's what I call them, row crops, like celery or carrots or potatoes or cabbage or those kinds of things. And typically they're individual plants. They're usually covered, and they, have a drip irrigation system underneath it, where you put a sensor in there for not only moisture, but for nutrients. And then the sensor will send data back to the pump, and it will, increase or decrease. Now, the water is going to go through no matter what, but say it needs more nitrogen or it needs more phosphorus or whatever it needs, it'll increase or decrease those nutrients to the plant too. So the plant gets exactly what it needs when it needs. Very efficient, and water use, which is another passion of mine. I think, that's a whole podcast in itself. We could talk about water. But one of the other things, we're working with the USGS, the United States Geological Service, and they're using our technology to measure the volume of water in rivers, so that you can do, flow analysis. And that flow analysis, and while it's, the I guess the logical thing is there going to be a drought or is there not a drought? But more importantly, if whatever's in the Columbia River or in the Colorado River, probably right now today, is really important to the guy in Arizona, because that's going to tell him what kind of crops he can plant, 2 or 3 months from now, and what that's going to look like. So being able to create that water grid, I think, is pretty important.
Fascinating. Rob, this is amazing. I can't tell you what a treat it's been to just hear you talk about all the amazing IoT technology and then how you're actually using it on your own ranch. I mean, that is just incredible.
Thanks.
Thanks for sharing your story. We're out of time, but would love to have you back on the show sometime and hear about how implementing some of those IoT projects on the ranch goes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. It was really fun.
Great. What a fascinating guy. I mean, I just love talking to someone who, is trying to just deal with the normal things you deal with as a cattle rancher and growing crops, but who also sold an IoT company to Amazon, and works with, works with so many interesting businesses. I think one of the things that really stuck out to me was his point about social engineering being more dangerous than, hacking in the sort of movie sense where we think, there's someone in a dark room, hacking into a system with code. And that was very thought-provoking, and I really appreciated that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way that he put it, like, it seems that humans are the weakest link in this situation, and probably he's right. You cannot manipulate like a machine. I mean, machine is 0 and 1 unless like there is some kind of issue that we can exploit for that. If we follow like all the best practices and the attackers do not know something that it's like a 0-day bug or something like that, then okay, it's not that easy. But yeah, humans can be manipulated. That's true. So social engineering is quite a thing.
Indeed. All right. Well, we will catch you next time on the Data Stack Show. Thanks for joining us.